Welcome back. Classified concerns. President Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence have come under significant scrutiny in recent days for dozens of classified documents being found in their homes after each of them left the vice presidency. The controversy comes amid renewed scrutiny for former President Donald Trump and his own toils with classified documents after his home was raided by the FBI in search of classified documents back in August. We'll talk about the significance of these documents, what the consequences may be, and what all of this means for 2024. Plus, I'll sit down with school board candidate Aiden Branss to talk about his candidacy, local politics, and more. Today, January 27th, 2023. From Ishan Media, this is the Ishan S. Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. With me, your host, Ishan. Hello, and welcome back to the Ishan S. Show. So glad to have you all back on. Today we have an interesting topic to discuss, and we have my interview with local school board candidate Aiden Branss. So stay tuned for that after the break in a couple of minutes. But before we get into anything, I want to introduce a new segment. Very exciting. So before the midterms, we had Midterm Watch. In Midterm Watch, we discussed key races across the country, we made predictions, and we surveyed candidates, and we even interviewed some. Many of you liked that, and it had a lot of positive reception. And I think it was really important for many of my listeners. A lot of you guys are young and aren't as involved in politics. I think Midterm Watch gave you a gauge of what to expect in politics and what to look for in election in such a big election. So after giving it some thought, I'm really excited to introduce 2024 Watch, the exciting and cool sequel to Midterm Watch, not 2022 Watch, to Midterm Watch. 2024 Watch isn't going to show up in every episode, but we'll definitely have 2024 Watch if there's anything notable in the 2024 race for president or control for both houses of Congress. But without any further ado, let's get into this week's 2024 Watch. So for our first time doing this segment, I want to discuss former UN ambassador and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. I've definitely talked about Ambassador Haley on the show before. I think it was back in 2021 when we were covering potential Republican candidates way too early. And we also had her talked about her in an IshanSshow.com article on the political news blog. You can check that out. But anyway, Ambassador Haley is very interested in running for president. She's been considered a rising star in Republican politics for over 10 years. She has an appeal that reaches the broadest wings of the Republican Party, and she maintains cordial relationships with key power brokers in the party, like key donors and elected officials, because these people matter a lot. And so when you maintain good connections with them, when you have access to these great networks, and when people like you in general, that's favorable for any person running for any office, but very importantly, the presidency, where it matters the most. Another distinction, I guess, that you could say is she is one of just a minute number of Trump administration alumni that left the administration on their own terms without too much controversy. Nikki Haley was out the door because she said she wanted to leave. Now, if you were keeping track of the Trump presidency back then, many of you might know that people were not leaving the White House by their own terms. A lot of them were either being forced to resign or, if you were unlucky, sometimes just outright fired. And that happened sometimes indiscriminately. I think it was at the point of the end of President Trump's term that basically his entire cabinet, or well, not his entire cabinet, but much of his cabinet and so much of his inner circle was just a bunch of deputies that were elevated to the position because their bosses just ended up quitting or were fired. But Nikki Haley was not one of those people. So on paper, she seems like a strong enough candidate, and she definitely thinks so. She's been preparing for years to run, but she's been ramping that up more recently, building a donor network, going to early primary states like New Hampshire, Iowa, and South Carolina, her home state, obviously, and she's been increasing her attacks on the Biden administration. If you check her Twitter, there has been this sudden increase in everything that she's been tweeting about, attacking Biden for this, attacking Biden for that, and she's definitely not shying away from it. She's making it really obvious that she is thinking about this run for the presidency. And I think her pinned tweet right now is her interview with Sean Hannity, where he's asking her why she thinks she should run for president. And that's like such a great indicator of just how interested Nikki Haley is in this. Now, in a recent Fox News interview, she said that there's time for change in the Republican Party, and she thinks that she can be that change. So here's some of that interview.
Bring in more people to our party that can really talk about the solutions that we need to go. If I run, I'm running against Joe Biden. That's what I'm focused on, because we can't have a second term of Joe Biden.
So might we be seeing a candidate Haley? Very likely, yes. Although she has said she wouldn't run if Donald Trump was running, I think after a pretty underwhelming showing in the 2022 midterms and his diminished role in the GOP and its politics, Haley sees an opportunity for herself to jump in. She's been hiring people, she's been increasing her media presence, so she's definitely eyeing a run and is probably one of the most openly ambitious potential contenders and challengers against Donald Trump for the top job in a sudden shift. All right, that was today's 2024 Watch. We'll come back with more on Ambassador Haley and the rest of the Republican field for president. But for now, let's get into today's main topic. So if you've been watching the news, classified documents has been a key term in all of our headlines. What do I mean by classified documents? Well, the U.S. government and the national security apparatus has a system of security clearances. You are cleared for a specific level of security, and that means the higher your security clearance, the more documents you have access to. So the government gatekeeps a lot of classified documents. You really need to achieve a very high security clearance in order to gain access to them. Most of them tend to involve matters of national security, threats, terrorism, intelligence, etc., things of that nature. So who's at the top of the list? Who's in this nice club of people that gets access to this? Well, presidents, vice presidents, secretaries of state, defense, people like that. They basically have access to all of these types of documents, and that has very much to do with the nature of their jobs. I mean, think about it. If the president, is supposed to order a nuclear strike, national security is a big deal there. And I think it'd be best if that information remains with them, but in tight circles and in secure locations, as opposed to whatever. So that's the topic that's been in the news for a few months now. It started back in August when the FBI raided former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida in connection to reports that former President Donald Trump had dozens of these classified documents in his possession after leaving the White House. Now, you have to understand, it's inappropriate for anybody to have access to these kinds of documents when they do not have that security clearance, at least not anymore. Whatever your view may be of the raid itself, the fact that these documents were actually found there is concerning. After that happened, there was a lot of outcry here and there, but Attorney General Merrick Garland, who is the top law enforcement officer responsible for the Justice Department here in the country, appointed a special counsel or a special investigator to look into these documents and look into the handling of it and how exactly it is that Donald Trump ended up having access to these documents, or how he even had these documents even after leaving the White House, and why it is that he didn't turn them in sooner. Trump, for his part, has denied any wrongdoing, but again, and the investigation is still pending. Now, that got a lot of headlines, and people everywhere were freaking out, specifically on the Democrat side, on the left. People were freaking out. They're like, oh my God, Donald Trump has all of these documents. And yeah, that's pretty concerning. But funnily enough, though, a few weeks ago this month, classified documents were found in President Biden's old think tank office, in his old office, a place where he worked at after leaving the White House pretty frequently back in 2017. And then more were found in his Delaware home, and then more were found after that. House Republicans were pretty outraged. So they announced that they would be investigating Biden's possession of these documents that were found with him that he wasn't really authorized to have. Merrick Garland then announced that he had appointed a special counsel in the Department of Justice to investigate President Biden and his handling of these documents. So here you have two presidents, one incumbent and one former, one Democrat, one Republican, each being investigated by the Department of Justice for inappropriate possession of classified national security documents. Whoa! But wait, there's more. Earlier this week, news came out that former Vice President Mike Pence also has possession of high-level classified documents. He turned them in, but all of these guys either are or want to run for president. So honestly, I mean, just seeing how many of these types of people are coming under this scrutiny, it's honestly a resume builder at this point. But after that, in a not-so-subtle nudge to other former high-ranking officials, the National Archives, which is responsible for keeping the records of the U.S. government and is responsible for holding onto these classified documents, things like this, issued a request to all former presidents and vice presidents to please turn over any classified documents in their possession. So, if you're a former vice president or anything, anybody listening to this show, and you got classified documents in your basement, then maybe go turn them into the National Archives and don't sit on them. But that was the story behind the headlines. But here on the Ishan S. Show, we're here to talk about the politics of it. So what does all of this mean? Why does it matter? As I said, the now Republican-controlled House has just gotten the red meat they want on Joe Biden. Joe Biden has scandals to his name, but many of them don't have a lot of merit to them. And they're kind of stretched a lot of the time. But this is different. If you're a member of the House, or you're a Republican member of the House, think about it. You have just found out that the Democratic president is under some real hot water for possessing classified documents that he wasn't authorized to have. You can stretch all kinds of news stories, but here you don't need to do a lot of stretching. This is an actual piece of information, a fact that might prove to be concerning. What are you going to do? Investigate the heck out of him. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has suggested that he'll be directing multiple House committees to investigate President Biden for his handling of these documents and how it is that he had them. Now look at this politically. President Biden entered the new year with some pretty good approval numbers and general likability. Like, people were happy with him. And I know we've discussed President Biden's disapproval before, but in reality, many of those numbers were not skewed, but they were misrepresented. And I think the midterms proved that, because in exit polls, he was polling higher than what we were used to seeing. And so people were pretty satisfied with him, and they were praising him. People were liking it. Democrats on Capitol Hill were pretty happy with him. Things were looking good. But then this issue starts to stem, and suddenly Democrats everywhere are getting mad, frustrated, and nervous with Biden because of the only thing people will talk about now is classified documents. They don't care about the division within the House GOP. They don't care about George Santos, who we will cover one day on this show. No, it's about these documents. That obviously creates a very problematic situation for President Biden. Although his administration has said that they're not afraid of any investigations because they turned in all the documents. They say we have nothing to fear. But then on the other hand, for Democrats, they are obviously on the defense. Republicans are going after Biden. They're attacking him because that's the news, right? That's the headlines right now. That's how it's working. So the Democrats are trying to shift the narrative back to Donald Trump because, again, he was caught with these documents, dozens of them. Don't look here. We're not doing something bad. No, look over there at Donald Trump. Democrats have been trying to draw a very hard line between the Trump and Biden way of dealing with this issue. Democrats say that the president did turn in these documents upon finding them in his office and in his home, whereas Trump did in fact deny having these documents and supposedly even knew that he had them, whereas Vice President Mike Pence and President Biden, both said they didn't actually know they had these documents on them. And so Trump, they say, did not turn them in even when he was asked to. That's a pretty important distinction, I'd say. But in the eyes of the American people, there are very few ways you can play this to make it sound nice, because the fact of the matter is that you got caught with your hand in the cookie jar after dessert. So, all right, that was a look at this week's biggest headline, which is about these classified documents. It's an evolving story. For all you know, we could be back here next week talking about more of this issue. So we'll be covering this story as it continues to move on. But when we come back from the break, I'll sit down with local school board candidate Aiden Branss to talk politics, his candidacy, and more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. All right, so we're back from the break. Now, I've made it clear on this show 1,000,000,001 times over and over again that voting and political involvement is important. And, a big part of this show was covering the 2022 midterms back in November. And while those elections might be over, it's not like voting and political engagement is over altogether. We have elections happening all the time, everywhere, at any time. And it's important for you, my listeners, to be paying attention to everything that's going on. And so our guest for today's episode is running for school board in the Palatine District 211 area, and to talk about major issues going on in the community, and to talk about himself and his political career starting off right now at the age of 19. We're going to be joined today by Aiden Branss. Aiden, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ashan. It's great to be on.
So before we get into the interview, why don't you take a few moments to introduce yourself to my audience?
Of course. So my name is Aiden Branss. I'm 19 years old and I'm running for District D211 School Board. 2 years ago, I wrote a book called 2020 from a teenager's point of view. And the book was just about my experience in the pandemic and my perspective on everything that happened that year. And that's when I really started to get politically involved. And when I wrote that book, I didn't think a whole lot was going to come out of it. But to my surprise, hundreds and thousands of teenagers and young people, they started buying it and they just loved it and they connected with me. And I got a lot of young people to understand the severity of a lot of the big issues that were happening that year. So I continued on writing more books, and with my most recent book, an autobiography, Who is Aiden Branss? It's been picked up by many big retailers like Barnes and Noble and Walmart, Half Price Books, just so many bookstores. So that's what I have to say on that.
Wow, you're a published author, and you've written so many of these books. Tell me, obviously you said that COVID and 2020, the dumpster fire of a year that was, you said that was the main thing that got you involved. But was there any catalyst before that, or something else that prompted that like there was something in the back of your head that you wanted to write something, or you wanted to get your voice out there? Was there anything in the back of your head before you were a published author?
So actually, yeah. So in 2017, we had a newly elected president, and I was watching a lot of news at the time, and I was only in seventh grade, but even then I knew the severity of what this person's actions and words and how it could damage our country. And I knew from a young age those types of actions have dire consequences. So, yes, I have been watching for many years. And in my book, actually, Who is Aiden Branss, I do talk about at the time how I just saw what this person was saying, and I was just very nervous. And I think I was right about the consequences. And at the time, a lot of my friends weren't really into politics. So it was just me. But I kind of knew in that moment, like I would eventually end up writing about politics or running for office myself. I always knew I had a voice, and I always have been very expressive, and I'm always just down to earth. And I was a little surprised myself, like when I wrote my first book, but I knew it was gonna eventually happen. So yeah.
And so with these books that you've gotten out, um, you just kept writing. You just kept writing, and um, so what kept you writing? Was it just the support that you got from people buying your books and people actually paying attention to them, or was there something else, or was there more to be said about issues?
Well, that's a good question. So, yeah, a part of it was the support. And in the follow up year, I made the sequel 2021 from a teenager's point of view. And that year in itself had its own issues. Like we had President Biden inaugurated, and there was a lot going on. So I just kind of felt like I had to keep talking about the current issues and what was at stake. And again, just the support. I was just so surprised by how many people actually connected to my story. And this year, we're actually doing something kind of interesting. So I have my own publishing company, Aiden Branss Books. And this year, I'm actually giving new authors new opportunities to write their own books. Like we already have 5 new books from 5 new authors. I'd like to shout them out. So my friend Danny and Yurid and Jaquel and Chloe are all working on great books about their own lives. And my goal with that is just to give young kids a bigger perspective, because I've learned not just one person can tell the whole story of the world. The truth is, like, I'm just a white kid and I don't know everything. So giving other people these opportunities, I think, can really speak to other people and audiences that I wouldn't be able to reach.
All right, very interesting, and
Yeah.
not know about the publishing firm, so that's cool to know. Something for
Yeah.
our audience to hear about, maybe. Uh,
Hmm.
but let's get into some politics, shall we? Uh,
Yeah.
so you are running in the District 211 area, northwest suburbs, and a lot of my listenership is from this area, from this community. Um, what would you rate as the biggest issues of this campaign for school board in this area?
I think some of the biggest issues that's happening within the district, there's a lot of people, they're trying to ban books, which as an author, that really aggravates me. And there's a lot of controversy revolving the new sex ed curriculum, and people very much trying to fight back against it. And we're having a lot of people showing up at board meetings and harassing our board members. So we're dealing with a lot of extremism and harassment right now. And it's very unfortunate what's happening. And that's a big reason why I'm running, to just fight back against that, because it's not okay.
And of course, that's not necessarily a very easy path. What might that fight entail if you are to win?
Well, if I win, I already know I'm gonna have to deal with harassment, like I already am. And it's gonna be a fight. We're gonna have to listen to many public comments from people, and we're gonna have to hear from our constituents a lot and their opinions. But really, I think the biggest thing I could do if elected is vote in favor always of the students and the teachers, because they're the ones most affected by these decisions and policy changes. So that would just be my biggest thing: voting for what's right and voting on things that would not harm the community.
So, with education being such a hot button issue, as you've explained, other issues that have come to mind include funding. getting money out to different programs, different groups. And as a District 211 student myself, I have observed that there have been a lot of issues when it comes to getting money around. So as a potential board member, but even as a candidate advocating for these issues, in terms of the financial aspects of managing a school district, what are some things that you want to focus on when it comes to funding?
So I just want to make sure the funding is going in the right places. It's going to help the students, it's going to help to the school's infrastructure, things like that. Because a lot of my opponents, they claim to know a lot about the financial situation of the district, but it's actually not true. And I would like to kind of go into that. If some of these opponents of mine are elected, they want to put funding, some of our district funding, into charter schools and private schools. They want to fire our superintendent and hire one that would align more with them. They would cut a lot of our budget. And they would say things like, oh, it's to ease the taxpayer. But really, budget cuts would hurt our district. I think right now our financial situation is very fair. I'm very open to hearing people's concerns and opinions on this. Um, but yeah, a big part of being on the board is managing the property taxes and the property value of this area. And again, if some of these extremists are elected, they are going to sink our property values and it's not going to be good. And that's why voting in these elections is super important. Even if you do not have a student in the district, your taxes go to this. And that's why it is so important to go vote for these elections.
And thank you for that plug. These elections matter, and I have encountered countless people. I mean, even if you, to a listener maybe who may not even agree with what you have to say, I hope the message is still getting across that your tax dollars are going into this district, no matter what it is that you say or do. You have a responsibility to come out and vote and participate and make your voice heard, because this is obviously your tax money that's being dealt with. So thank you for including that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an at-large election, and of which I think it's 4 candidates that are set to win out of 13 running, including yourself.
Yeah.
In the event that perhaps you and some of these opponents that you describe are elected to the board, how do you plan on managing things if that's the case you find yourself in?
If they're elected as well as me.
Yes.
Oh, wow, that sounds like a nightmare, to be honest. That would be very hard. Ever Me trying to pass something positive would be a struggle. They would oppose so many things.
Would you try to
Wow, that I'm sorry, continue.
would you try to work with them on issues?
Hmm. It really depends what the issue is. I will work with them to pass things that I think are positive and that will help our schools. But in some situations, I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Hmm. All right. So let's switch gears a little. So you are a young candidate. You are 19 years old. And we just had Nabila Syed on a few weeks ago. She's 23 years old, ran, and is now one of the youngest members of the Illinois General Assembly. And she described some of the challenges she faced as a young candidate, including people maybe not necessarily taking her as seriously enough. And so you've been a candidate for a few weeks now, for a while. Um, what are some challenges or triumphs even that you have come across in your candidacy so far?
Well, lately it's just kind of been a lot of people thinking I'm just too young and I don't have the experience or the knowledge to properly be a board member. It's a lot of ageism. You have people who just doubt me, not based on like my education or record or anything, but just because I'm only 19. It could be really hard sometimes because when I talk to younger voters, I just see the light in their eyes. They're so happy to have possibly representation on the board. But some of the other people of the community, they just don't see it that way. And even if I do try to like kind of explain where I stand on things, it just always falls back to you're too young, you don't know what you're doing. It can it could be a challenge sometimes. Like today, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. I've had some members of the community like urge me to withdraw my candidacy because they do not think I can properly be a board member. And it's hard sometimes when you have so much backlash like that. But really, I just try to focus on the positive because there is a lot of positives. There is a lot of good things happening in my campaign, and I am very confident that we will win.
So well, let's put the negatives out of the way. What about some positive support that you've gotten? Have you gotten support from even members of the board itself?
I actually have. I've talked to a few of the board members on the phone. I've had great conversations with them. They understand why I'm running and they do back me. And they have never told me to back out or anything. They urge me to run, and run this race. Um, there's been a lot of positives. Like this one time, just a few weeks ago, I was canvassing and I stopped by Jersey Mike's really quick just for a quick bite to eat. And one of the girls working, I think she was like 20 years old, and she recognized me, and I was really surprised by that. And she was like, "I just thank you so much for running. What you're doing is inspiring to so many people." And she gave me a hug, and it's just the little things like that that keep me going. And again, just a lot of support from former classmates of mine, a lot of support from my old teachers at Palatine High School. There is so much support and there is so much love, and people are ready to see Gen Z in office. That's why they elected Nabila. I think people are ready for a fresh perspective and new energy to better our communities.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to give my opinion on what's the race, but I do agree with the notion that young people, it's time for us to also have a seat at the table. And so any person that serves as a agent of doing that is always great. And seeing more young involvement is important. So going off of that, for people that oppose you on the basis of age, what do you say to them? What is something, if you were to use this podcast as a platform to speak to them, what would you say to the people that doubt your candidacy, not because of your stance on the issues or your qualifications, but just because of your age?
I would just say, I hope you could see things from a different perspective. I hope you could give me a chance and just give me the opportunity. And if I really don't do well, you could say I was wrong. But from this point right now, I would just ask for them to listen and maybe think on it a bit. There's nothing wrong with changing your opinions on things. And I want to say to those people, I will represent you too. I don't represent just some people, I represent the entire community. And I would like them to know I'm here to listen to their concerns and opinions and whatever they have to say. I'm on their side. I'm not against them. I am on their side.
All right. Well, Aiden, we are almost out of time for today's interview, but before I let you go, are there any parting thoughts that you have that you'd like to share with my audience?
Yeah, I would just like to say, I know you have like a young audience, and I would just like to say, if any of you ever have a dream or you want to pursue something big, go for it. You can do it. We are young and we have a lot of energy, and we are going to be the ones making the decisions for the future. So if you have a passion, go for it. If you want to write a book, go for it. I support you, and I hope you all just live really great lives.
All right, Aiden Branss, author of works such as 2020 from a Teenager's Perspective and Who is Aiden Branss, and current candidate for D211 School Board. Thank you for joining us here on the Sean S. Show today. We hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.
All right.
And so that does it for us here today at the Sean S. Show. If you liked my commentary, then go ahead and follow the Sean S. Show on Twitter and Instagram for breaking news posts and updates about the show. And if you want to learn more about political stories, then check out my political news blog on the SeanSShow.com and go ahead and subscribe to it. Do us a favor and share this episode and all your other favorite episodes with your friends and family. It's the best way for this show to grow and get more people listening to it. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.